So one of my fun sessions that I was lucky enough to take part in was playing drums on Pete Townshend's Empty Glass album at Wessex Studios, which was a very unusual kind of occasion given the fact that Pete dedicates a day every year of silence to Meher Baba, the spiritual figure he follows. This made for quite a sort of surreal recording session because he was having to write everything down between takes, like saying, go back to the on-beat a bit more and that kind of stuff. So that was quite surreal. And then also, as part of that session, on a track called Keep On Working, he said, I want you to play this packing case as a kick drum. I thought that was a bit odd, but I mean, nobody would query the decisions of a great artist as him, so I duly played it. And then in due course he was mixing and he heard the sound and he said, why does the kick drum sound so shit? And not surprisingly, it was a packing case.
Hello, I'm Tony from Bonner's Music and I'm in this beautiful log cabin studio today with composer and music producer James Asher. Now, James has been a customer of Bonner's for many years and he's also a good friend of mine, and I've helped him actually select some of the keyboards that he's got in his studio here. But I was delighted to hear recently that James has had some great success because one of the tracks that he recorded back in 1979 has been sampled by rap artist Tyler the Creator, and I've got Tyler the Creator's album here. Now the second track on here is called Corso, and that's the track that Tyler has created using James's samples. So I'm here to talk to James and let's see what he's got to say.
Well, I create music in a number of styles. The first main one is centered around drums and is tribal and world beat and integrates different elements of ethnic material with kind of groove context that I create for it. And then I do more kind of relaxation or chill out stuff, a lot of which I've provided for Orasoma, the colour therapy company that I've done much work for. And then sometimes I'm just kind of experimenting with stuff to see what comes up and on a whim just trying different possibilities and seeing where they go.
So how was library music perceived at the time you started your music career?
Well, it was a sort of a welcoming arm into the music business for me as someone who enjoyed doing instrumental stuff but without any particular destination in mind. But people commented that it would suit visual stuff, which is how I got into doing library music. It was really considered the less glamorous younger brother of commercial music. And but it was good for me, and every time I successfully provided a track they liked, I'd plough back the recording costs I got into buying more gear. And as someone who's addicted to that, as you may well know.
I think we're all addicted to buying gear. So let's go back in time, and can you tell me about your early days of learning music with your father and your brother, and some of your busking escapades?
Sure, yeah. My dad, who had a great sense of humour, which was always useful, kindly taught me some fundaments of 12-bar blues, and so stuff like the Louis blues and Dust My Blues were things that I enjoyed playing. And from there, I did a lot of experimenting just to sort of to expand that into other areas, and I try playing pentatonic clusters with my elbow and all that kind of stuff, which was fun. And I got to busk with my brother, who plays rhythm guitar very well, and we had loads of fun busking in London and filling up Earl's Court Tube Station with a bunch of people that the police then had to move on because I think we did quite fun, quite compelling kind of live jamming folk, mostly folk music really, and memorable tunes. It was fun.
So tell me how you acquired your first reel-to-reel tape recorder.
I was working on the Royal Caribbean cruise line, paying my dues, having previously done that working on a holiday camp as a blue coat, Pontin's blue coat. And one of the other band leaders on one of the other ships had a Revox, and it was very much the thing that one aspired to get because it was this really pristine Swiss quality audiophile recording device, which was then the centre of a great deal of creative exploration for me. And I would bounce from one side of the Revox to the other, amassing a multi-track result before the point when multi-tracks were that common and easy to get hold of.
And what would you class as your first proper paid job in the music industry?
I guess as a sound engineer at R.G. Jones Studios was one of the first things really where I was able to learn a lot of the craft of engineering from Jerry Kitchingham, who was a great character. And I was also doing other stuff like going and collecting telexes on a scooter and setting up sessions for string players, and Robin Scott would come in and record pop music and all that kind of stuff. So it was, but I mean, the main thing that struck me from working in studios was that a lot of it was very uncreative. A lot of it was about how can we do another version of, I don't know, Get Up, Shut Up Your Face, or whatever it was, you know, the songs that weren't particularly inspiring. But so that made me really keen to get hold of my own setup and start experimenting, because I just felt there was all these really amazing possibilities that I wasn't seeing the facility being capitalized on to explore.
So can you tell me about Bruton Music and your involvement with them?
Yeah, Bruton Music was formed by Robin Phillips, who had previously worked at EMI, and he was a very radical, creative thinker, and he was very encouraging as well, and I think taught me the fundamentals of how to create music that would suit visuals so that they would have a consistency and they would be easy to edit if necessary to a shorter, tighter format. And
I hear you had dealings with Pete Townshend, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I dropped off a cassette to Ramport Studios in Battersea because I was a big fan of both Pete's writing and his rhythm guitar playing, which I found very exciting. And Tony Butler from Big Country listened to this cassette and suggested Pete listen to it, and he liked it. And so I had a call from Pete saying, "What can we do for you?" So that was quite obviously very encouraging and an honour to have, you know, such a acknowledgement. So I went down to Eel Pie, which was a fascinating building where there was, because he was deeply enmeshed in the spirituality of Meher Baba, and of course also people were quite sort of reverential about him as a kind of pop star figure, slightly sort of blurring the lines between this, you know, is this a pop star or is this something greater, and, you know, the expanded beyond we're also dealing with. But I was very appreciative of being kind of welcomed into the family of people and the community that were there, and it was just a real sort of encouragement and acknowledgement of you know, exploring creative stuff and having some recognition that my ideas might be worth taking on board.
So tell me about your Abstracts album, and how was it conceived, and what kind of unusual recording techniques did you use to create it?
Well, this is effectively my first album, and I was combining acoustic stuff like violin, mandolin, auto harp, sometimes guitar tuned to a chord, that kind of thing, because I've always been a wannabe guitarist, but I'm not one. And then I would combine this with the various electronic stuff I had, whether that's like a Pearl electro echo or just combining normal speed with double speed, all that kind of stuff. So I ended up with a number of compositions which are fairly sort of random in how they turned out. But I called in to see a publisher called John Gale, who ran a small library called Studio G. He'd done a lot of consultancy for films and stuff, and the ideas seemed to appeal to him, and how he put things out then was on vinyl, So he amassed a number of these pieces into an album called Abstracts. I've got some of my previous records here, and this one, for example, is a double album of electronic musical sound effects, which I did using the Roland Jupiter 8, which I had one of the first versions of in the UK, and it was a creatively stimulating challenge to be asked to come up with various sounds, from the sound of a train leaving the station using white noise, or the sound of somebody getting an answer right on a quiz show, or a suspenseful drone that might be used in MasterChef, which might be good for a few repeat usages, or any number of really sort of spot sounds that would be applied to both TV and occasionally drama programs. And what else have I got here? So there's two versions of my single with Pete Townshend, that's the 12-inch and that's the 7-inch. And this featured a lady called Angie from a stage school on the vocal, not necessarily quite how I might have chosen to finish the record, but using RipX I am able mercifully to not be aware of her presence on the recording, which is fun. In fact, RipX is a totally amazing and kind of new level sampling set of possibilities we've come to, which is extraordinary, and also gives you the opportunity to figure out what makes up great tracks that you love, because it isolates the different element parts so well. So that's exciting. And then, of course, we have the Abstracts album, which John Gale commissioned. And it says here I'm using polyflange drums, inverse echoed cymbals, Korg synthesizers, harmonizer feedback, all that kind of stuff. It was great to have that sort of measure of trust and endorsement given to you by a publisher, because it's just very encouraging. And if you're starting out, that's what you need, and that's what's, I guess, harder for people these days. They don't have people to give them feedback, or they don't have advice being supplied by what used to be A&R departments, who were impossible to get hold of on the telephone in days gone by and now just don't exist.
When and how did you first become aware that your track Oriental Workload had been sampled by Tyler, the Creator?
This was in April of 2021. I had a call from Tyler's manager, Dan Jensen, in Los Angeles saying, "Do you know who owns this track?" And so I put them in touch with the publishers who'd acquired the track from, well, originally it had been with John Gale Studio G, then it was sold to Eagle Rock, who do a lot of the videos, like Jeff Beck and stuff. They sold it on to Downton, who had a premises in Covent Garden, and then Downton sold it to Concord. All of this is great, except that as the writer, it doesn't make it any faster to get your royalties.
Is this the first time your music's been sampled commercially?
No, there were two other samplings from that same Abstracts album. One was the Chemical Brothers sampling Asian Workshop, which then became a track called The Sunshine Underground, later to become a triple platinum album. And then also Uncle sampled Fairground Ghost, which was a track where I had a guitar tuned to a chord and I was playing bar shapes on it and whacked it through some glorious phasing and played various percussion bits on top. And
cool. And how's your musical life changed since these big name acts sampled your tracks?
Well, clearly it's a sort of quite a strong personal validation to have somebody who's as broadly known as Tyler, the Creator, which I especially register talking to young people who, a lot of whom seem to be familiar with his work. And I don't think it's done my Spotify following any harm.
So could you just tell me a little bit about how you created Oriental Workload?
It began with playing some piano notes from a Bechstein upright piano, which I was playing percussively and damping the strings at the same time. This was on a piano which I'd actually gained in exchange for some of my first published works from John Gale. And then I added to this a melody on double speed piano, a tambourine, some drum kit, which was being recorded via an Alice 6-2 mixer, which Pete Townshend had kindly loaned me. And then the end result I thought was promising, and I was using this kind of Oriental flavoured scale, I mean, with a slight nod towards, I suppose, Japanese tuning kind of flavour. And then I had through my day job as a sound engineer at R.G. Jones Studios, I had access to a device called a Marshall time module, which created the most unworldly and weird kind of swooshy effects in a really amazing way. And that certainly added to the character. And then also to expand the quality of the sound, because mostly I was bouncing mono from one side of a reel to the other. To create the feeling of stereo, I would dub the finished result out to a Nakamichi cassette deck, which was as good a quality as I could get easily, and then fly it back to the stereo pair of the original, and then I'm hand syncing the reels, so the whole sound is kind of drifting all over the place. So I imagine, probably armed by perhaps the help of a mild spliff or whatever it might be, this sound really hit the spot with Tyler. And so the end result was part of this Abstracts album, and luckily, given that the hand syncing can cause grave problems with the cutting arm of vinyl, it could have actually snapped it, but I was relieved to hear that it had successfully gone through this process and still survived. So it remains intact as the quirky, oddball thing which I meant it to be.
I understand you're now working with a big name Japanese guitarist, and as well, how have you enjoyed collaborating with other musicians?
When I did a lot of work for Osoma, who are principally concerned with colour, I did an album of musical interpretations of colour called Colours of Trance with an Irish harpist called Madeleine Doherty, which was fun. Through really good luck and a favourable wind, I got to meet Shiva Mani, who is a master Indian percussionist, and we did a really fun album called Drums on Fire, where every time he came through London, he would stop off at my house in Shepherd's Bush, and we explored different things. A really incredible performer percussionist with phenomenal charisma and ability to just do solos in the moment. People would have their jaw dropping. I mean, we'd go into an Indian restaurant and you get all the cooking utensils out of the kitchen and do an impromptu solo, and people were just absolutely gobsmacked because he was so in the moment. You could only follow him and just be taken away by the magic.
Wow. And can you tell me about the Japanese guitarist you've been working with recently?
Yeah, I was one of my favourite musicians is Jeff Beck, and I was very sad that we lost him earlier this year. But through watching videos on YouTube of him, I happened upon seeing Hiroyuki, who is this phenomenal Japanese guitarist who was so close in feeling to how Jeff Beck played that I was absolutely amazed. And he also acknowledged that I'd mentioned my drumming credit on Pete Townshend's Empty Glass album and stuff, and he said it would be fun if we collaborated. So I sent him a backtrack where I removed some of the top line melodic elements and to see what he would come up with, and what he sent me just, I thought, blew it completely out of the park. It was just extraordinary. We decided to move to Eastbourne partly because we'd had weekends away and really enjoyed it. The opportunity arose to design a custom building, which is a log cabin, to my specifications. So I'm choosing where the windows are and how it feels, and the nice feeling of being surrounded by pine, and the natural wood thing is very grounding and pleasing. And I've just tried to design it so it's the most efficient and fast and friendly for capturing ideas, because that's really what floats my boat, is coming up with stuff.
And what are the criteria that you use for the gear that you choose for the studio?
It's stuff which is intuitive and easy to access, nothing boggling or too complicated with sub-menus and all that kind of stuff. And of course, glorious sounds. The sounds have always been a tremendous source of inspiration for me, whether it's been going back in time, the Jupiter 8 with its glorious rainbow coloured controls and just wonderful, truly analog premium design, to samplers that have a good sample set and are well thought as to how you access them. Stuff which doesn't tie you up in knots with complexities and just suggests things by the quality of their sounds.
And how do you feel about artificial intelligence when applied to creative media, particularly music, images and video?
Well, it's a fascinating area, really, and I totally understand people's reservations about it, but there again, there seems to be a lot of paranoia also with it, and perhaps a slightly closed attitude to actually just taking a moment to see what it can provide and how quickly it can do that, and how in many respects it's a bit like having a friend you can bounce ideas off. I have a feeling Peter Gabriel used it for the lyrics of his new album, and he's someone whose work I admire a lot.
So I can see you've got a really great selection of the latest keyboards and synths. Can we just talk about just some of your favourite aspects of each of the things that we can see here? So I can see you've got a Roland Phantom 7 sitting next to you there. What is it you like about that?
Well, to be honest, this is mostly used in the role of being master keyboard, and I've always liked the feel of the touch of Roland's keyboards, and it does come with a reasonable library. In terms of the other keyboards, so at the top we're seeing the Juno X, which not is the friendliest thing to look at the display of or the architecture in terms of saving programs, but a wonderful quality of sound, which to me is pretty much identical, if not better, than the original Jupiter 8 I had so far back, and absolutely glorious on analog strings, bells, pads, a number of other things, but just great keyboard to use for those areas, and I've come to know that, and I feel I should be bolder and get going jiggy with the editor and seeing what else I can come up with, but time is short, and the main thing is to come up with something else to make sure the Spotify audience hasn't lost the plot with what I'm trying to do. And then second down we have the Montage, which is Yamaha's flagship keyboard of some 7 years standing now, and hopefully maybe updated, but has a fantastic onboard library. And I mean, there's a great deal to be enthusiastic about that for, because it means that as opposed to waiting for samples to load of a particular thing, you can just very quickly, okay, let's try some Seattle strings or whatever it is, just to get a vibe on what's likely to be working with the idea, and that the idea is the principal thing. Down the bottom we have the Nord Stage 4, the most recent edition, and a spectacular update to the previous version of that keyboard line with this very nice to play redesigned keybed, and a fantastic set of factory presets. So a very welcome addition, and very musical feeling device.
So how does recording in the studio compare with playing live?
There's something about the process of playing live, getting the energy back from the audience and then responding to that, and then the whole thing sort of rotating around is unparalleled. It's amazing.
So what projects are next in the pipeline?
I think the current climate is really much more about singles, which seems to work best for Spotify. And in many ways that's quite liberating, because you don't have to have the pressure of coming up with a whole 12 tracks or whatever it is. It's just an idea is as good as it is, and then I may well have to struggle with the famous genres and tags scenario, because nothing easily necessarily sits neatly in one box. You can try and push it in there, but the reality with the human imagination is that you come up with stuff that's in between categories often. So even though it helps people find your stuff in theory, it's important it doesn't become a restriction.
So what advice can you give to aspiring music producers?
Maybe consider a sane job of some kind.
A sane job?
No, to be fair, there are many different ways of getting started, but I think the main thing to remain mindful of is the people that do love what you do, and there are invariably people who will. It's just a question of identifying them, perhaps respecting what their lifestyle and patterns likely to be, the channels where you're most likely to reach them, cherishing them, nurturing them, spending as much time on social media as you care to, although I totally sympathise with people who think that their interest is more about the creative process itself rather than creating doodles and waggles to keep people interested. But it is an important part of the nurturing the audience.